It is with great pleasure now to introduce this morning's speaker, Russ Wilson. Russ is located in northwest Pennsylvania in Forest County. Russ grew up on a conventional dairy farm and has been involved in agriculture his entire life. Russ worked off of the farm for a few years, but in 2007, Russ returned to being a full-time livestock producer. Russ raises cattle, sheep, equine, hogs, and a couple of dairy goats, plus pastured poultry. The title of this morning's talk is More Pasture and Fewer Inputs. So without further ado, let's welcome Russ Wilson. Russ, you are free to share your screen.
Thanks, Rich. Ooh. Good morning, everyone. Today I want to share with you some of the things that we're doing here on our farm to keep our livestock out and making our farm profitable and working with nature's intended. This here's a video I took this morning when I moved the cows. First thing this morning, we're moving our livestock twice a day. We're strip grazing, and we haven't fed any hay to the brood cows since March 27th, 2020. And it's looking like we'll probably be out this year until about the 15th to 20th of February grazing before we have to supplement any feeds or any hay. I have 220 acres. I have 130 acres of my own pasture, and then I lease a farm up the road from me. And as Rich said, we have cattle, sheep, goats, equine. We pasture hogs. We do some custom grazing. Plus we do pasture poultry as well. And we have been able to keep the livestock out on pasture for more than 300 days per year over the last 7 years on average. We're a low input farm, and I'm hoping to share how you can take some of the inputs out of your farm and make your farm more profitable. And I'm going to share some innovative farming techniques that I have come up with, and hopefully we can reduce the overall inputs on your farm so you can be profitable as well. Lower input is going to require a higher level of management. We need to set goals. We need to set our goals just out of reach, so we can maximize what we're doing on the farm. Try and keep things simple. As human beings, we have the tendency to overthink things. You know, if something's getting way too complicated, you know, rethink it, make it as simple as possible, utilize your livestock as much as possible. We plan, we're always planning, you know, where are we going to be next year at this time? And we can't plan if we don't have good records. And in doing all these things, we try to maintain and keep things as low stress for the livestock as well as me and our soils. You know, we don't really think of our soils. You know, every time we have a grazing event, we're stressing our grasses and our soils. We work off of principles, and the principles that we're using has come from all over the world. So, you know, just because I'm in northwestern Pennsylvania doesn't mean that you can't apply the basic principles on your farm or farms and make yourself more profitable and more productive. We've adapted the livestock to our environment. The cows that we had in 2007, 2008 would probably starve to death on my farm today in 2021. We have really worked hard to switch the cow herd over. We're not feeding any supplemental grains. This here's a layout of my main farm. This is my soil types. I'm working with Armagh, Kavod, Wharton soils mainly. They're if you look at the Armagh soils and you look it up in a soil survey, it spits back to you. It says it's not recommended for agricultural use because it's way too wet. We're able to be out grazing on those soils now that we've got our soil health. We got the water infiltration. We're able to graze them almost year round without doing any damage to the soils. This here's the infrastructure that we have on the farm. This here's the farm. My farm's split by a road, so this is farm east. You can see that there's actually another interior fence here that's not on the map. But the yellow is my interior fences, my perimeter fences are the green. And then we'll subdivide these down into smaller paddocks throughout the year. We may do as many as 1,500 different paddocks throughout the year as things progress. This is the western farm. This here on this section over here is all above ground water line. And then as you've seen on the past, these are all hydrants that I have. I believe I think I'm up to about 37 hydrants buried on the farm now. And there's about 12,000 feet of water line. And this allows us to keep the water with the livestock at all times. And it's going to aid in our soil nutrient cycling. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And this is the lease farm that I have. I just have a perimeter fence around it. I have no water and I have no interior fencing. And I think if I were to redo my farm and do things all over, I wouldn't have any interior fencing, because whenever you're out adaptive grazing, you can set your interior or set your temporary fencing to adapt to what you need to do to keep your soils healthy and as productive as possible. This here's what I had back in 2007, 8, and 2009. And it's only reason for this is because this is all I knew. I grew up on a conventional dairy. You can see there's a lot of problems here, a lot of bare soil. There's about 7 acres of bare soil here. All my nutrients are around this wagon. This wagon here, I'd start hauling feed to the cows around 15th of June, or as soon as I could get the flail chopper out to fill it, because my pastures are so poor and, non-productive. Take a look at it. And I was looking at this picture yesterday. Right here is my watering point, a cast iron bathtub that all the cows had to come back and drink out of. And now we're going to show later on what we're using for our watering system, that we keep the water with the livestock at all times. And we were feeding a lot of inputs. We had a lot of grain. We fed a lot of grain. I ground, 2 or 3 tons of grain a week to feed the cow herd. This year's in the middle of July. You can see the cows was unhealthy here. Their hair coat not shed off yet. This calf here with pink eye. We had a lot of problems and I needed to fix them. I didn't like them. And, be quite frank with you, I wasn't making any money doing it. Here we made hay. We made a lot of hay at the peak of my hay making. I made a 700 wrap round bales, and now we're not making any hay whatsoever. And we are still growing corn, but we're not picking it. We're grazing our corn. Back in 2007, 8, and 9, this shear cow was the manager of the farm. She kind of got demoted. I'm the manager now, and she does what I say. I don't have to, it doesn't dictate. She doesn't dictate me going out making hay and picking corn and grinding feed for them anymore. We had a lot of health issues back then as well. 2012, 2011 is whenever we started rotating the livestock once a day. And it was a really hard transition for me. And I'm sure a lot of other folks would have the same. It was, I guess, more of a it was something unfamiliar. So it was very hard to adapt to it. And, it took me an hour and a half a day to move the livestock once per day. And now we're moving livestock up to 4 times a day, and it takes an hour and a half, and keeping the water with the cows at all times. And that's going out and moving. But there was a lot of turning points for me. I do a lot of research. I try to make things more productive, more profitable. And I ran across, there's many studies, and it doesn't matter. I'm mainly a cow-calf operation. If you're sheep operation, goats, dairy, whatever, these numbers are pretty much the same. They're going to vary a little bit, but your highest cost on your farm is stored feeds. So that's, for me, that was telling me that I needed to get rid of the stored feeds that I had. And then second is depreciation cost, your equipment. And then, of course, your operation costs. This here is some of the records that we keep. WLC, Wilson Land and Cattle, that's my farm. Our grazing calendar runs from 4/1 to 3/31. In 2011, we had 120 grazing days, and we had 45 animal units, and we were on a 7 to 14 day rotation. I thought that's what rotational grazing was at the time. And after the cows would get rotated out of those paddocks, once we got a rain, I'd go in and make the hay that they didn't eat. So I was, really pounding the soils really hard and, trying to get the most that I could. And I was struggling to feed 45 animal units. In 2000, if we look down here in 2016, I'm going to draw some. If we look in 2016, we doubled the carrying capacity, and we had 294 grazing days by going from a 7 to 14 day rotation to moving the cows 2 to 9 times per day. And the 9 times per day it's more when in the spring and the fall of the year, whenever we had a lot of wet weather conditions. We don't experience the many moves per day now that we have the soil health and the water infiltration. In 2016, I had one of those aha moments. My goals were to graze for 300 days a year. In the fall 2016, it dawned on me the reason I didn't get to over 300 days a year is because my goal was set at 300 days. So in the fall of 2016, we set our goal at 365 days of grazing, and that's still my goal today. And you can see in 2017, 2018, 19, and 20, we have had over 300 days of grazing. And this year would have been a lot better, but I don't know if you've experienced this up in the New York area. That's where most of our viewers are at, or our participants are at today. It was a really dry year, and I'm really impressed that we've been able to stay out as long as we can with 85 animal units. And our 7-year average has been 308 days. And I think that's pretty good.
Russ, while you're switching slides real quick,
yeah,
and maybe you'll get to this. For your waters, do you have any electric heaters in any of your?
Absolutely not. I've come up with a way of, and I'm going to show this later on. I'm going to show it later on.
And then are you also going to cover your corn grazing later on?
Not so much, but I can talk about it later on if somebody's interested in the corn grazing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then the labor for moving will also be covered?
Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about that right now.
Sweet.
In 2011, we had 120 grazing days, as we covered before, but I purchased 3,500 gallons of diesel fuel, had $2,400 in plastic wrap, $26,000 in fertilizer. That's not including all the maintenance costs and my labor to try and keep 45 animal units on the farm. So in 2016, whenever I sold all the haymaking equipment and all the harvesting equipment. In 2016, we doubled the carrying capacity on the farm by going two to 9 times per day grazing. And I only purchased 200 gallons of diesel fuel. So I went from 45 animal units to twice the animals on the farm, and I only purchased 200 gallons of diesel fuel compared to 2011. If we look at the fertility removed from grazing versus haying, it takes approximately 4 tons of grass or dry matter to produce 250 pounds of beef. And if we have the livestock out onto the soil in their soil nutrient cycling or placing their fertilizer, they'll, just for an example, they remove less than 1 pound of potassium per acre. If we're taking the hay off of that land, we're going to take 160 pounds of potassium. And we used to soil test, and actually back in 2011, whenever I purchased all that fertilizer, I applied half of what was recommended onto my soil. It was over $50,000 worth of fertilizer they wanted me to put on, and there was just no way. I lost money in 2011 with all those inputs. So, if we're able to cycle those nutrients back onto the soil as quickly as possible. And another thing with haying you need to think about, if you take that 4 tons off, you're pulling all these nutrients off of the soil, and in doing so, you're if you're putting them in the barn or storing them away someplace, you're locking those nutrients up, and those plants, it's not available to them until you get the manure spread back out onto that soil. No, it's supposed to be a video. This is a time-lapse video of a warm season grass field. And in a paddock in the summertime or in the growing season, we back fence everything. We don't allow the livestock to go back and regraze what they've already grazed. We keep the water with them at all times. This here's a stocking rate of about 50,000 pounds to the acre. It's kind of light. I think here we're only moving twice a day. It's a 3-hour time lapse. And then if we advance, that's pretty much all the shorter that we want to graze that pasture down, and then we'll move them. We move them again. This here's another one, another warm season grass pasture. You can see how they move, and that's about all we want to graze that down. We want to leave the plants. They produce carbohydrates and they grow. And those carbohydrates are used for leaf growth, root growth, bud formation, respiration, and that plant must photosynthesize and feed the plant before it can feed the livestock. But before it can feed the livestock, it also needs to feed those microbes. It needs to.
Your name's Bobo?
It needs to feed the microbes in order to have our partnerships with our plants and our microbes. Our microbes, they move nutrients to those plants, and those plants feed the microbes the carbohydrates or the exudates from the roots. This here was a turning moment for me on my farm, and you can replicate this pretty easily if you're still making hay or clipping pastures. On this side, we grazed it. We moved up to here, we grazed it, and the day we moved the cows out, I made the hay on the other half of this field. When we were making hay, I knew that we needed to keep a high stubble height. 5 inches is about all the higher that my disc vine would go at the time. In 10 days, we had 8 inches of growth for a total of 3 inches of regrowth. And on the stubble height on the graze side, it was 15 inches tall for a total of 7 inches. And in this field, we had approximately 250 pounds of dry matter yield per inch of plant. So in 10 days on the graze side, we gained an extra 1,000 pounds of dry matter that we can feed our livestock. So, you know, in saying that, you know, it takes grass to make grass. You need to consider the plants is denser at the base. So let's say we go into a field and it's 24 inches tall. The half that you need to take, you may take 16 inches off there and leave the rest. So, you know, it's not a, you know, if the plant's 24 inches tall, you're not going to take 12 inches, leave 12 inches. You may take 16 inches, leave 8 inches. But we need to leave the plant still, we need to leave living plant material above the ground. And the reason for this is, if we look in these pictures, if we remove more than 50% of the biomass from that plant, the roots start sloughing off and dying. And then if we take more than 80% of that, you know, the roots are going to stop growing 100%, and it has to rely on its carbohydrates to get started again. So you're going to lose growth. This here's the same slide, just a different way of looking at it. We knew this back in 1955, and I still haven't figured out why I was overgrazing my farm back in 2007, 8, and 9. Those roots, they go plenty deep, and the reason we want those deep roots, these deep roots here are going to access nutrients, moisture, and it's actually going to help cool the plant as well. If we leave material on top of the ground, it's going to keep that soil cooler, so you're not going to see as much of the summertime droughts as you normally would. The high stock density rotationally grazing, one of the great things with the high stock density rotationally grazing, you're going to have a smaller amount of living system disturbance. That is very important. You're going to have faster and soil nutrient recycling. Those plants you tramp over on the soil and you think that you're wasting, that dead material will be recycled back into the soil in as little as 21 days in a good, healthy system. Your manure pats, it used to be, I used to say 21 days, but we're seeing the manure being recycled back into the soil as quickly as 14 days now. You can't find manure pats on our farm. You're going to reduce the erosion. And that is very important, because that soil, once it's gone, it's gone. You're not going to be able to replace it. And in the high stock density, it doesn't seem like it, but you're going to spend less time caring for livestock. On average, throughout the year, I spend less than an hour and a half a day caring for my livestock, or my cattle, that is. And we have approximately 80 animal units right now. And whenever I was making hay, I would be up till 4 o'clock in the morning, wrapping hay, go to bed for 2 hours, and get back up and start cutting hay again. You know, I was putting 100 plus hours a weekend, you know, whenever I was making hay. But in the long run, once you become efficient at setting your fences and you get things figured out, you spend a lot less time. It's a lot easier on your body. It's not nearly as hard a work. You know, let the livestock do it. You know, they have mouths, they have legs, they're happy to be out there, you know, and whenever they're out there, they're a lot healthier. We don't experience with the health problems that we used to back in 2000, you know, back when we first started. I was on a first name basis with the vet. He was in here about once a month treating, you know, either hoof rot, pneumonia, you know, you name it, we had it. And I haven't had the vet on the farm for the cattle since 2012, I don't think. It's been a very, very long time. And he's actually retired now, so I don't know who I will get for a vet. In the high stock density rotational grazing, basically what we're doing is mimicking nature and keeping the livestock moving. You know, whenever you come to a problem or an opportunity, as I like to say, you know, you come to a certain area on the farm, how would it be cured with nature? You know, how could we fix this problem with nature? Or how would this opportunity, you know, how can we do it? And I've been talking a lot about soil nutrients. Like, it's very important to get these nutrients spread out across your farm. Whenever the cows is out there, it is very, very super important. This here's a little demonstration that we set up on our farm. It's been a while ago, but this year's we put the cows in here 800,000 pounds for 2 hours. We had 500 flags. We went out and we marked every urine and manure pat, and we ran out of flags. So we had a very even manure distribution across that area. And what I've found is the shorter period of time that you can get them in there, the more just distributed the manure can be. And, you know, after 2 years later, this paddock, you could see where we did this 800,000 pounds. So on a yearly basis now, I take certain areas of the farm and I do a super high stock density graze, and I might move them 7 or 8 times in a day to get this trampling, nutrient cycling effect on the farm. This is what 300,000 pounds of stock density looks like. One of the great things now, you know, there's no fences in front of these cows. In the high stock density grazing, the cows compete for available forages. And when they do so, they'll line up shoulder to shoulder and work across the field in unison. It's really cool to see. It's simply amazing. We've done hundreds, if not thousands, of forage tests on the farm. My feed nutritionist that tells me what I need for the minerals in the cows. I think he got sick and tired of me sending samples to him, but we've done a lot of forage tests. You know, New England aster, September 16th, it hasn't been cut. That's the entire year's growth, 24.5% crude protein. Relative feed quality, 205. Sedges are pretty common in your lowland areas that lay wet. You know, 117 relative feed quality. Deer tongue, you look deer tongue and velvet grass up on the internet, they're going to tell you it's low quality forage and it's not recommended for your livestock. You know, 24% crude protein, 32.8% crude protein, over 100 relative feed quality. That is high quality stuff. And actually that is more for gestational or lactational beef cows. That's way more than they need. They need more roughage mixed in with that. We've started planting a lot of pollinators on the farm. We see a lot of insects. The hummingbird moths, they return to the farm, a number of years ago since we started planting the pollinators. Whenever you bring the pollinators, you bring the predator insects, and it helps reduce the fly numbers on the farm as well. So we're not using any fly control. This here's a native pasture mix that I collaborated with Ernst Current Conservation Seeds. And we mixed this up and planted it on the farm. On the first graze, we had 2 tons of dry matter. Second graze, 4.5 tons of dry matter. On the third graze, we had 3 tons of dry matter for a total of 9.5 total tons of dry matter that was available to the livestock. In this second picture here, there's a border collie sitting back in there. You can't hardly see him. But one of the things you need to keep in mind, these are all native plants. I have not limed, I have not fertilized, I've not done anything other than rotational or high stock density graze across this field to achieve 9.5 tons of dry matter. And generally speaking, if you have annuals, with the exception of corn and Sudan grass, those numbers are really, really low compared to this. The established plants that we had in there, we went in and we did a transect for it. We had a lot of blue stem, Virginia wild rice, switchgrass, coastal panic grass, oxeye sunflower, Indian grass, partridge peas, tick trefoil. You know, there was a number of plants in there. It was very diverse, and that diversity actually is bringing micronutrients to your livestock as well, and it's actually keeping them healthier. Some of the dairy cattle that we've custom grazed on the farm, this field, the unique thing about this field here is whenever we get to say the 1st of May, this year's field is always a foot taller than the rest of them.
Hey, Russ.
Yes.
How did you establish the warm season grasses into your pasture?
Okay, I go through a protocol with my native grasses. The native grasses are very expensive to establish, so you kind of want to dot your I's and cross your T's when establishing native plants. And in doing so, what I'll do is I'm not organic, so I'll do a burn down in the fall and I'll plant a cover crop. And then I'll graze that cover crop in the spring twice, and then I'll do another burn down. If you're an organic producer, you can achieve this by, plowing or lightly disking the field and planting some cover crops. And then the cover crops, I kind of like to look at those as a reset button. It kind of sets the soil back to where you have a clean slate to work with. So in the spring, after I graze it twice, then I'll go in and I'll do a burn down, and then I'll drill those seeds into those pasture fields. And I don't necessarily follow the guidelines. They'll tell you to clip those pastures and stay off of them for 2 years. I'll graze those weeds. If you're rotational grazing or adaptive grazing, you can blow your livestock across there, not harm the plants that are germinating and seeding, but you can set those weeds back and you're still able to still graze those plants. This here's a switchgrass, big blue stem, Indian grass field, relatively poor quality. Switchgrass, I believe, was 4% crude protein. The big blue stem was around 2% crude protein in that field. And the way we were able to graze that without compromising the livestock is we would bring them into this native stand of grasses for 2 days, and then we'd put them in a high quality grass field. And in doing that, you need to think of the rumen as kind of like a batch system, and that higher quality keeps those bugs active in the stomach, and it actually helps them digest this poor quality feed better. Here's another picture. There's over 70 animals in this field. This plant here's big blue stem. So we like our tall grass grazing. And you can see here on our cow, this cow right here, she has what I call happy lines on her. You think in this type of forage, they would set the animals back. It looks like somebody's raked their hand backwards across that cow's ribs. And we're actually, now that we've called the cows out of the herd, they can't do it, And our calves actually are showing happy lines as soon as they start eating grass or can get a little bit older. It is a little bit challenging setting fencing, 6 and 7 foot tall grass. I'll run through with a side by side, knock it down, and then I set my fence in on it. Because if you try and weave your fence in and out of the grass plants, there's a good chance whenever you move the cows, sheep, goats, whatever, they're going to keep right on going and right through the fence. And it's actually going to short your fence down. Here's another picture. You can see I like to call these my little bombers. These little tree swallows and barn swallows, and there's bluebirds, and they're just continuously buzzing the cow herd, eating the flies and reducing the fly numbers on the herd. And again, this picture here, there's 70 to 80 animals in there. Here's another native stand of grasses. This here was on June 30th. This picture was taken on a June 30th. I can't remember which year. You can see it's pretty high quality, very, very long ribbon type leaves on the plants. So we've talked about the natives, and a lot of the natives we look at as weeds, goldenrod, asters is in this picture, our New England asters. They aren't necessarily weeds whenever you start taking feed quality samples. Deer tongue, a lot of areas, our pH is way low in our soil, and we have to apply tons and tons and tons of lime to get the pH in order to get our plants to grow. Why don't we plant plants that don't require all that extra input? I had soils on my farm when I moved here that the pH was 4.3. And I actually have deer tongue growing in there, and it's doing extremely well, and the livestock love it. New England asters, the New England aster relative feed quality 205. I mean, that's up there with sunflower. Sunflowers is probably the highest quality feed that I've ever tested on all the hundreds and thousands of tests that I've done. So, the New England asters, a lot of folks are out there clipping them off or having troubles with them grazing them. But there is ways of grazing them. Here's another video of Canadian thistles. It's just a patch. I mean, it's only probably, that patch of Canadian thistles is probably only maybe 20 feet around, I suppose. This is what it looked like after we grazed it. And then 2 years later, this is what we had. There's still a couple of the broadleaves in there are actually plantains. It's very, very diverse. Right there is a Canadian thistle. There's another one. But they're not overtaking the pasture. I mean, that's what that looked like after we did a super high stock density graze. Most of the time, your Canadian thistles are very, very shallow rooted. And if we can get a high enough stock density on there, we can actually kill them back or get them under control to where they're not a problem on the field. Milkweeds, we try to fence our milkweeds out, because if not, our livestock eat them. And the biodiversity is very, very important. I want as many different species of animals on the farm as possible. This goes from our microbes to our predatory insects to our birds, our cows. We have foxes, you name it. And the biodiversity, if you look in a healthy living system, the more biodiversity you have, the more resilient it is to weather changes and events that happen. So we need that biodiversity. This is some of the microbes that I've taken pictures of under the microscope. I've not been able to identify any of them. And I've asked folks if there's anybody out there that can identify these. I would appreciate it if they'd let me know what they are. But that there's just billions and billions of animals. And I talked briefly about the partnerships on our plants. Let's take a look at this plant over here. It's very, very shallow rooted. It's going to most likely go dormant whenever we get our summertime droughts, or, if we have the nutrients all mined out of the soil, it's not going to be able to do as well. So in our partnerships, this plant here may be able to bring up those nutrients and transfer them over into our microbes, and the microbes will feed that plant that specific nutrient that it may need. And that goes for a lot of these other plants. Some of the plants I would be very interested in digging down, like the cup plant. The cup plant, I'll bet the root systems go 30 feet deep on them. We got to be very, very careful when we work with a living system. If there's not enough food, our microbes may go dormant, our plants may go dormant. If we overgraze it, the idle, or let's say our idle nutrients are not returned back to the soil. We need to keep those nutrients cycling continuously on the soils and keep those plants growing. I've shown in tests, I've went out and actually shown through December, January, the grass is growing up to 4 inches here whenever they're supposed to be dormant. We never seen that until we got the aggregation and the aeration in the soil, where the soil really never freezes down. It has to get below zero in order for a stockpile field to freeze down on my place now. Now, where the cows have grazed, yes, it freezes down, but where the livestock have not grazed, that soil never really freezes. This is what I call good looking stockpile. Those plants are waist high. It's all knocked over. It doesn't look like there's much there, but there's tons and tons of biomass. If we're grazing in the wintertime, ideal grazing for us is 10 degrees and 24 inches of snow. The 24 inches of snow, I hear a lot of folks say, well, the cows won't graze through the snow to get to that grass. If there's not enough there, if we don't have this, they won't do that. So we have to have enough grasses to make it worth their while to go through the snow. If we only have, say, 2,000 pounds of dry matter, they're not going to go through the snow to get it. Now, if we have 4,000 pounds to 6,000 pounds, they're going to reach through that snow and they're going to get it. And the way they do it is they'll poke their nose down through, and then they start working a circle. They'll work a circle maybe 3 feet round, and then they'll move on to another location. And as far as hard pack ice, we've been able to graze through 12 inches of hard pack ice. Those cows' hooves are able to break that hard pack ice up. One of the keys is to bunch them tighter together and move them more often. Say maybe move them 3 times in the day. In the dormant period, or the supposed dormant period, we're moving our livestock twice a day until we get a hard pack ice. Then we'll pack them in tight, and then we'll move them 3 times a day. And by doing so, the hooves break that ice up into chunks, and then they can take their nose and easily push that ice off of the grasses and graze it easily.
Hey, Russ.
Yes.
How often are you, through your management, able to get that ideal stockpile, so that way, if you do get 10 degrees and 2 feet of snow, you're still able to graze?
Oh, that's a good question. It takes careful planning. A lot of times my soils, you'll see that a lot of people, or a lot of recommendations through some of the extension in the colleges, they recommend to have 60 days of grazing or rest on the soil for stockpile. We may rest the soil. We may only graze it once throughout the summer and then stockpile it through the rest of the year. We may have 120 days of rest on that soil. This field here, let me play it. This field here has around 100 days of rest. This here was done on New Year's Day of 2009. So it can be easily replicated to get that high stockpile. You just have to do careful planning and make sure that you don't try and go on a 30 or 40-day regrowth to stockpile. You can see, look at that grass that calf has in its mouth. I mean, he's not having to work very hard to get his feed. Here's another one, a little bit. I don't have a lot of good through the snow grazing videos, but that's another video, them grazing through the snow. If with doing what we're doing and we're not having to work quite as hard on the farm, I like to think and build things and try to make my life easier. Everything that I build, it's almost always to make another job easier. How can I make things easier? So we're going to make things more streamlined. And we have a lot of annoying problems on the farm. So let's come up with some solutions. Fencing can be very, very expensive. If you want interior fence on your farm, you can do it for as little as 17 cents a foot. Or, this fence over here, this here's done with sucker rods, high tensile wire, and 4-inch fin tubes insulators tied to the fence post, 5 cents a foot. That's more affordable. I think temporary fencing comes out with one strand of temporary fencing, a reel, the wire, the gate hook, and the post. You're looking at about 24 cents a foot. Now this year's, semi-permanent. Naturally, you're not going to be moving it regularly, but that's one way of getting the interior fencing on your farm. Longevity, this fence post, this insulator, that fence post, and these 3 strands of wire are 24 years old. It's still going strong. There's a lot of, your imagination is, making fence posts or coming up with solutions for fence posts. There's a lot of things you can use. This year's 1-inch conduit, round bar, busted up fiberglass step-in posts that have broken, put a screw top. There's my 24-inch or 24-year-old post, fiberglass, rebar, a stick from the woods. I've done that in an emergency, cut a switch, put a screw and insulator on it, and you're good to go. Now, I've started doing, instead of using screw-on insulators, at least for the top wire, I've went to 100% fin tubes, or there's a twist lock insulator that you can put on existing wire. You don't have to feed it through. But if you put that on and twist her down, the deer can't knock it off. The deer knock those twist insulators off quite frequently. The deer don't knock, they do bend some of your posts, but at least your wire's not on the ground and your livestock aren't getting out. And it's cheaper too. Now, I think about 16,000 feet, or the majority of my farm, has a second exterior fence to it. It's called 3D fencing. We have a lot of deer pressure on the farm. You can look the information up. Probably the best information that I've been able to find is the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. It's 36 inches out, 30 inches high. This here's a food plot. What's a 3D fencing good for? I have a neighbor. He plants a lot of food plots, and he's got a lot of deer pressure. And quite frankly, the deer will come in and destroy this corn, and it would never grow. So he does 3D fencing in it to keep the deer off of it. You could use it in your cropland, gardens. I have 3 friends that are actually started using it in their gardens. They don't have any deer damage whatsoever. Food plots, orchards, and pasture land, of course. Here's a deer getting hit on the fence. Here's a video of one screwing up and getting hit on the fence. You look at that. That's a screw on, or that's the fin tube insulator. She hits this fence really, really hard, and she doesn't do any damage. If that would have been the screw on insulators, it would have popped right off and our fence would have been down. Portable windbreaks. We want to be able to keep those livestock in those paddocks. We want to keep our nutrients spread out across the soil. So we use I've built portable windbreaks. You can actually build these out of pallets. I used all my hay wagons for the windbreaks. I didn't want to give the hay wagons away. And nobody really wanted to give me anything for the junk gears that I had. So I built windbreaks out of them. And I keep the windbreaks with the livestock at most all the time. You can see I have 5 of them there. We just weaned our calves last Tuesday. So when they're in confinement, they're going to go back out on pasture on Monday. And we'll give them 2 windbreaks, and the cow herd will have 3 windbreaks. 30% porosity. If you had if that was solid and the wind hit that, it would flip it upside down and just, 15 or 20 mile hour wind. Water tanks. Water is a big challenge for a lot of folks. And it used to be for me as well. And at one time I had 2,500 feet of 1.25 inch water line above ground, and I drug it. Now in freezing temperatures, it won't work so well, but it was that important to keep the water with the livestock at all times, to hook a water line and keep it with the cows. This tank here is watered 110 animal units. The way you're able to do that is if you keep that tank within 300 feet of the livestock at all times, and have a high flow valve. That valve there was a Job valve, Job Topaz. There's a lot of them. Apex makes one. I'm going to show you my preferred valve now. I don't use the Job valves anymore. They're really expensive. Here's a quote. It always seems impossible until it's done. How do we keep liquid water or keep water in a liquid state when it's below freezing? This is an insulated tank. This here was with a Job valve, and then I had a there's a hole drilled right there, and it ran water all the time. It doesn't run that much water. It's a lot cheaper to run water than it is to heat water. Now we've changed this around a little bit. This is my best watering stock water setup. I have a brass, this here's a brass valve. It's a high flow valve. There's a lot of folks switching over to them. They're relatively inexpensive. You can get them for less than 20 bucks a piece. And then I drill and tap and put a needle valve. And then you can see I leave the water just run just a little bit all the time. And then it just flows back over the fence so we don't have a wet spot. And then whenever the soils are a little bit wet, most of our activity or a lot of our pasture damage is done at our water tanks. So I'll put portable matting down. That's 2 feet by, I don't think, about 5 feet, somewhere around there. I have 2 handles on it. It works beautifully.
Our valve setup.
I'm gonna mute this. This is our valve setup. It's a Mueller valve. Relatively inexpensive. Like I said, you can pick it up for 20 bucks. There's other places that you can get it. I always put a cage around all my valves. It doesn't matter what kind it is, but we're exclusive to these brass valves now. I've never ever had to rebuild one. I've never had one break. They're just great little valves. So something for you to think about. And then on my tanks, I put a plating. You can use 55-gallon tank material. I just had a piece of plate laying around. I don't even seal my holes up anymore. They seep a little bit. It's no big deal. In a 24-hour period, it might leak a half a gallon out. Compared to, 100 animal units drinking 1,500 gallons of water a day, that's nothing. So in closing, we're going to be able to extend the grazing season. Extending the grazing season, where there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be able to do. We're going to be able to increase our soil structure. So we'll be able to have our soil structure. We're going to have water holding capacity, water infiltration. better weed control because we're leaving more cover on the soil. Most weeds come on because we daylight the soil too much, and the sunlight actually triggers those weed seeds to germinate. We're going to have a break in insect and parasite cycles, so we don't have, we're not worming our cows. We're not treating for flies on the cows. You're going to be able to sequester more soil nutrients, have less, phosphorus and potassium running off in our storm water. You want to keep those nutrients on your farm so you can keep your grass growing. And, for me, the last two are the most important. You're going to have a higher financial gain. I mean, that is key to, you look at the statistics and 95% of all farms are operating in the red. And to me, that's not acceptable. I was in the red back when 2011, whenever I had all those inputs. But, if you can get rid of all those inputs and get things better, we'll have more free time as well. Spend time with your family or, do whatever you need to do. Like me, I like to build things, build those tanks. I'm in the process of building, and it should be done this year finally. I'm going to have an automatic fence mover where it automatically moves my temporary fencing in front of the cattle. And I'll be able to move them up to 70 times a day. So that's going to be pretty exciting. I'm going to go ahead and here's another quote. Essentially all life depends on soil. And then if you would, I post a lot of videos on Facebook. I post almost the daily video on Facebook. You can follow me at Wilson Land and Cattle, friend me at Russ Wilson. Give us a like when you're there. I also have a YouTube channel, and then you can contact me at my email or through my website. So I'm going to go ahead and open things up to questioning. I don't think we have a whole lot of time left, but I'll answer any questions if we have any.
Yep. So we'll start off with recapping the water.
Yeah.
So your east side and your west side, are they both pressurized systems or is it gravity fed?
They're both pressurized systems. With the high flow valve, that brass flow valve that I showed you, I have a lot of other friends that are on gravity flow. They're doing extremely well with that valve, but the one gentleman, he's watering, I think, 300 heads. So he actually went to a 1-inch brass valve instead of a 3/4 inch brass valve.
And you don't have issues with that weeping from the tank? Any issues with continuous running like that with the well pump and pressure tank?
No. I mean, whenever we only weep that water out whenever it's below freezing. And we're only pumping an extra maybe 10 gallons a day, and that's really nothing compared to what a cow drinks.
Okay. Go.
And for me to pump water, it's very, very hard to calculate it, but for me to pump water, it costs 0.00175 cents a gallon to pump, which is a lot cheaper than trying to heat water. And if I was heating water, I'd be limited to how far away from the structures that I can go with my electric lines. So, I'm able to keep the livestock out where they need to be.
And then, do you have water line buried to every paddock?
About 30% of the west farm has above ground line. So I have to be very careful of how I graze that. I have to graze it whenever it's above freezing, or if we have adequate snow to where the livestock don't need water. There's times of the year that if you have the right weather conditions, the livestock won't drink water. They'll actually get their water nutrients from the plants and the snow that they're in.
Okay. And then when you're moving your cattle so many times per day, in the evenings, is there like a separate overnight pasture for resting, or is it just in their grazing field they had been in?
I adjust the paddocks accordingly. Most generally, I'll go out and I'm usually in the pasture field at daylight. I just like to be out at daylight, and I adjust the paddocks accordingly. If I'm going to have a really hot day, we're not seeking shade for those livestock as well, you know, and that's another plus of that smaller water tank. The water flowing into those water tanks is cooler, so the livestock are actually drinking cool water versus hot water. But yeah, I lost my train of thought there for a minute.
The pasture size for overnight.
Oh yeah. Okay. The pasture size, you know, we'll adjust that accordingly to the amount of time that they're going to be there. So, you know, if earlier in the day, you know, I'll move them at daylight, you know, usually it's around 5 o'clock, usually like 11 o'clock. And whenever it's hot out, the cattle like to group together. And grouping them, whenever they get grouped together, they like to burn areas out or kill the grass, make burnout areas. I call them burnout areas, but areas where they kill the grass from them grouping together. I'll move them again at like 1 o'clock. So that's only a 2-hour period. So between 11 and 1 o'clock, the paddock's going to be smaller from, you know, what the morning move's going to be. And then I'll move them again, usually like around 4 o'clock in the evening. So, you know, those paddocks are going to be, you know, conducive to the size of what the livestock are going to, you know, the amount of time that they're going to be there.
Now, with that many moves, are you able to not do a back fence at certain times of the day because of that?
I back fence everything.
Everything. Okay.
During the growing season, I back fence everything because it makes a night and day difference whenever it comes to the soil nutrient recycling, your regrowth, and you know you need to rest that soil. And if you strip graze, you know those livestock will sneak back on you, and they'll start tipping those plants off and setting them back, and you potentially lose overall growth for the entire year.
And then what growth, I know we didn't touch on the corn, but what growth stage is the corn when you let them loose into it?
Okay, the corn, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the corn briefly. I know time's up. Are we able to run over a little bit, Ben?
Yes, for those people that need to leave, you should feel free to leave, but it seems like Russ is ready to answer a few more questions. So those that want to hang on, we'll stick around.
Yeah, I'm good until 3 o'clock. That's when I move the cows next. So the corn, what I say about corn is graze it whenever you need it. You know, if you're suffering summertime slumps, you know, graze it during the slump period because you're and rest your perennial grasses. But most generally, whenever I graze corn or like to graze corn, is usually I'll start in October, November-ish, somewhere around there, and start grazing it through the wintertime. And we'll strip graze that as well. And the corn, a 100 cow herd will get a slice of corn maybe 50 feet wide and 150 feet long. That's all they'll eat, or all they'll get for an entire day. You know, there's a lot of grain there, a lot of corn. I've heard people complain about cows choking on the cobs. I've never experienced that problem. I know there's other guys that's been doing it for 20 some plus years. They haven't lost any cows, but I also have another friend that he lost a cow to one choking on an ear of corn. Now, if you're 100% grass fed, you're going to have to get that corn or get on that corn whenever it starts shooting tassels, so you can get the harvested and off there before get that off there and before it gets grain on the ears.
And then throughout the season, what's your average rest period per paddock?
On the entire farm, you know, my paddocks may rest from 30 days to 365 days. But average across the whole farm is approximately, this year it was around 120 days of rest.
Okay, that's all we have at the moment. There was a question about weather conditions back in, so like in the wintertime, I think is what she was referencing to. It said, how often are weather conditions what you're looking for? So I guess like how often, I guess, maybe if the weather's in cooperation or based on your management?
It used to be weather used to be a huge issue on the farm. Back when we first started this and our soils, it was really poor and we didn't have the water infiltration and we didn't have the soil structure. I mean, if we got a quarter of an inch of rain, I was running and hiding, looking for a spot to put the cows so I didn't plug them up to their knees. And now that, everything has gotten healthier and everything's improved, I can be actually out on most all my wetland soil in a 3-inch rain or, the snow. I don't really worry about it as much as I used to. But I always have a plan B or a C, D, whatever. I have a backup plan. What if it does get too wet? I don't want to screw those fields up. I don't want to pug them up. I don't want to risk having runoff off the farm, soil runoff. So what I do is I always have a couple fields that I know that I can get on in hurricane weather and not do any damage whatsoever. So I kind of have a backup plan as far as that goes.
Okay. How many cows do you graze? I know that there may have been a slide with your animal units total for the farm.
Yeah. An animal unit's 1,000 pounds an animal. It doesn't matter if it's a goat, sheep, cow, horse, whatever. And most generally, they consume approximately 2.5% of their body weight, with the exception of like a ewe and a goat. They'll consume up to 4% of their body weight whenever they're lactating. But most generally, an animal unit's 1,000 pounds animal. And my animal units this past year was at around 85, which is down a little bit. But with the droughts that we had, we're maintaining extremely well.
And then total acreage that you use, maybe both for sorry, there's questions coming in.
Good.
Total acreage, so like your corn ground that you graze plus the perennial grasses that you graze.
Okay. I have 145 acres total grazing land. This past year, I didn't grow any corn. This next year, I'm going to grow probably around 6 to 8 acres, somewhere in that neighborhood. But we've done, when we're building our soils and getting things in check, here's something for you to chew on. If you folks have a pen handy, you might want to write this down because I didn't have it in my presentation. Whenever we were doing cover crops and annuals with corn, 30% of our grazing was done on 10% of our land using annuals. So, 10% of the land up to 14 and a half acres, 30% of the grazing was done whenever we were doing a lot of annuals. Now, the problem with annuals is it's very costly, expensive, and time consuming. Perennials, good, healthy perennials trumps annuals any day.
All right. Do you graze as one herd, like cattle, sheep, or do you have many separate herds based on age group?
My cow herd runs as one herd with the exception of the bulls. I do have a handful of bulls that I graze separately. And the sheep and the goats don't get along with the cows. I've tried integrating them, but with the high stock density that I'm at with my cattle, the cattle kind of pick on the sheep and they actually treat them like footballs, and they'll beat it. They'll literally knock them right out of the fence. I mean, they'll come up and just throw them right over the fence. So the sheep and goats run as a group together, and then the hogs, naturally, they'll be in a group together. And we're not as intense with, the sheep follow the cows most generally, and the goats will follow the sheep, and then the hogs, they'll be off by themselves someplace doing. When we move the hogs regularly too. I have no tolerance for hogs rooting in my fields.
All right, and then we do have someone that's tuning in that would like to ask a question through their mic,
Sure.
maybe because the question was too long to type, and so I'll let them unmute and ask.
Sure.
Ben, this is Brian Lotcherette. Operations Coordinator for the Watershed Ag Program. Russ, great job on your presentation. I guess mine is a more global question of
Sure.
how we have an opportunity here in this regional area and transition from traditional dairy, family dairies to beef and grazing. How do we make this more of a movement to get folks to start the process? You gave some, great data, great facts of things you did, but it's just hard to get that common dairy farmer away from diesel, away from iron, and going more towards this sound science of soil health, if you will.
It is. It's the fear of the unknowing. Whenever I sold my haymaking equipment, I was scared to death that I wasn't going to be able to feed my livestock. And so to try and get to transition, I guess more than anything is let's look at the dollars and cents, because you're going to be way more profitable and you're going to have a lot less labor. You're going to be able to do something else with your time. So I guess more than anything, let's look at the dollars and cents. And with the dollars and cents comes along the environmental aspects of it, helping the soils, maintain their fertility and not washing it down into the, I guess you guys are probably, I'm not sure which watershed you're in, but I'm in the Mississippi watershed. I tell folks that I don't want to share with the guys down in the Gulf of Mexico, because that's not where my water ends up, is in the Gulf of Mexico, and there's a lot of algae blooms and stuff down there, and I don't want to contribute to that. But let's look at the dollars and cents. I mean, it's a lot more profitable to do what something similar. I don't expect anybody to go out and try and mimic me 100%, but if you just apply the principles. I know it's a very, very unnerving, unsettling feeling, stepping away from making a lot of hay and doing corn silage and stuff. It is very, very well worth it. And it's a lot more, for me, it's a lot more rewarding doing what I'm doing, because, I know I'm doing good for the environment. I know I'm more profitable, being able to, bring more profit to the farm and be more self-sustaining.
Thank you, Russ. And then finally, we do have one more. And there's two more. Do your weanlings graze with the cows? And then what is your animal unit of cattle per acre or acres per animal unit for grazing?
Okay. Yep. After we get the calves weaned here, we just weaned here last Tuesday, and they're going to go back out on their own pasture here on Monday, and we'll keep them separated until the cow until the grasses start growing in the spring. Like last year, we turned out March 27th, and I expect to be turned back out, approximately that date this year. And at that time, we'll put the weanlings back in with the cow herd. And the reason we wean is I've had very bad experiences trying to let the cows wean the calves. You get a 700 to 900 pound calf and it wants milk. It's very easy for that calf to push, a newborn off mom and steal that milk. So, on my farm, my carrying capacity on the farm is one animal unit per 1.62 acres. On average for the past 4 or 5 years, for a period of 308 grazing days. Most generally, if you get a plan done from the NRCS or someplace like that, here in my area, they figure on average for the soil types that we have is approximately one animal unit for 2 acres for a period of 180 days. So I've found the more animals and the more managed and more collective you are, the more productive your farm is. But you got to be careful you don't get too many animal units, because then you're going to be overgrazing or you're going to have to feed hay. If you overgraze, you're going to be setting those plants back, and you're going to be losing production.
And then when does your calving season start?
My calving season in my area, I start calving on the 21st of April, and then I'll go to the 21st of June. And the cows that don't calve out within the first 40 days or 45 days, and they're a little bit late, I'll actually call those cows because there's some fertility issues there. And I will not calve anything past July 1st. If you have calves that are born in July and August in that summertime heat, calf can't regulate its body temperature when it's first born. And most generally, at least my experience is those late calves turn out to be dinks because they've just been stressed too much.
So
Yeah.
Russ, we have one more question, and we'll make this the final question.
Sure.
And then after you answer it, I'll say a few more words, and I'll shut the meeting down. So
Okay.
that final question is, what is your market freezer selling feeders?
Okay. Yeah. My main market is selling breeding stock. Whenever I started back years and years ago, that was my dream, is to sell breeding stock. We sell probably 80% of our animals as breeding stock. As we all know, not every animal will make breeding stock. We'll sell bred heifers, weanling heifers, weanling bulls, and 2-year-old bulls off the farm. And then what doesn't make the cut for breeding stock, we'll sell a few feeders, and most generally we ask 10 to 20 cents over market price, and we have repeat customers or a waiting list for those feeders if we have them available, because when they take them home, they know that those animals are going to perform on their farm and put weight on. And then what we don't sell is feeders, or if we have orders, we'll sell freezer beef. And then there's animals, in my opinion, won't make freezer beef. They're not good enough quality, so I'll take the loss and send them to the sale barn. I'd rather take the loss and sell a poor quality animal to anybody.
Well, thank you very much for a lot of wonderful information that you have shared. I do hope that at some point, maybe we can come down and visit your farm, or have
Sure.
you back again at another one of our conferences or workshops.